G'day mates, it's Busta here, and before the video begins, I would just like to give a huge shout out to Care Of for sponsoring this episode. Care Of is a monthly subscription vitamin service that delivers completely personalized vitamin supplement packs right to your door. And with winter finally coming to an end, now may be a good time to get an extra boost for this season, whether looking for more energy, better sleep, to maintain stress, or something else to help you feel your healthiest. Care Of's fun online quiz makes it super easy too, by just asking you about your diet, health goals, and lifestyle choices, and it only takes about 5 minutes to find out your personal scientifically backed vitamin and supplement recommendations. It can be really hard to know what vitamins or supplements you should be taking, but Care Of makes it easy to find out what you specifically need to be your healthiest. Also, a portion of every sale goes towards the Good Plus Foundation, which provides expectant mothers in need with valuable prenatal vitamins, so you won't just be doing yourself a favor. I actually took the quiz too to see what signing up would be like, and it was really informative, user-friendly, and also really fun. And last year, I also just had the worst luck with getting the flu constantly, so my goal this year is to try and boost my immunity and regulate my sleeping patterns. So to access Care Of and for 50% off your first month of personalized Care Of vitamins, go to takecareof.com and enter BeScared50. That's go to takecareof.com and enter BeScared50. There will also be a link in the description below for you guys to follow up with, and I hope you take up Care Of on their generous offer. And without further ado, let's begin. My dad was a freshman in high school during the time, and he was active in sports and was in a football season. Back in that day, he said that he would have to walk to and from school, and that they used to use what they called the Stinky Tunnel to transport because it eliminated the risk of crossing over the train tracks. This tunnel was approximately 50 yards, and a lot of homeless people and druggies would stay in that tunnel overnight for some kind of warmth or cover for the winter and autumn nights. Now, one day, my dad went to school as usual and then had football practice after. They were getting ready to play a big game, so practice lasted a while, and it was around 7 o'clock when he finally got out and headed home. The walk back home was approximately 372 feet. I know this because I've measured it myself since then. He got to the Stinky Tunnel, which he decided not to take because there were already people down there, the druggies and the homeless, and he decided to walk across the train track instead. He said that he had just crossed the track when he heard the loudest crying, just really emotional, like something was wrong. He looked everywhere to see where it was coming from, but it was to no avail since it was so dark out. Only the fast streetlights were barely illuminating the dirt around him. He started to walk faster at this point, and the crying began to follow him. My dad's arm hair was standing on end, and he was developing goosebumps at this point, so he started to speed walk. But the crying was increasing in strength and volume. My dad at this point just started to run, and he was already tired, so it was not his fastest, but the quicker he ran, he said, the closer that the crying got. Too terrified to turn around, he just ran as fast as he could, and he didn't dare look back. He said that it followed him all the way home, and that the last thing it said was, "Mi hijo." He got inside and collapsed to the floor in tears, and my grandmother running to him to see what was wrong, and he didn't say a word about what happened, and just simply got up and went to his room. He actually had to take a break telling me that story, saying that it took a lot out of him then, and he's just a really big skeptic, so I actually believe him. Interestingly enough, my mum has also had an experience like this. So, when my mum was 10 years old and lived next to a small ditch next to a highway, she stayed at her friend's house, which was a little closer to the ditch. The day went normal, just riding bikes, playing, typical girl stuff. And then night came, and they knew it was time to go home since the streetlights came on. They were sitting in the friend's bedroom, radio on, listening to music and playing a card game. It was already dark out, and the music from the stereo filled the room. Now, my mum's friend lived with her mum and grandma, who both spoke fluent Spanish. My mum understood it, but she couldn't really speak it well. And all of a sudden, my mum just developed this overwhelming sense of anxiety and terror. And then there was crying. The girls both heard it, but brushed it off as a cat or a drunken neighbor. And soon, the crying began to become louder and more obnoxious, like it wanted to be heard. The girls paused what they were doing, staring at the window, and once they looked that way, the crying became ear-splitting, so loud that it was resonating over the stereo. Both girls having hands over their ears, fearful of what was happening, the grandma burst into the room, holy water in one hand and a rosary in the other. She was screaming over the crying, praying in Spanish, and my mum says that when she did this, the radio started to static and the lights began to flicker. Both the crying and the praying were booming extremely loud until it just went quiet and it all just stopped. The grandma then said a prayer over my mum and her granddaughter and made them go into the living room, instructing them not to return to that room for the night and not to look out the window. My mum returned home in the morning, not speaking of what happened, and even when she tells the story now, just an overwhelming sense of fear takes over and she gets goosebumps. This happened to me a couple of years ago while I was still in high school. My dad and my stepmom had gone out with the neighbours for lunch or something, and they asked me to take my little sister, who was around 4 at the time, and go to the grocery store for them while they were out. I had just received my licence and my first car a few months ago, and so I frequently ran errands for them. But we lived in a pretty remote country town. All we really had was a grocery store, a Walmart, a McDonald's, and 2 gas stations, and it was usually pretty quiet. I had no problems with going out on my own, even at night, to run errands, and had never had any issues in the past. So I got to the store and had gotten the groceries with no trouble, and I put them in the trunk of my car and was strapping my little sister in her car seat. I drive a VW Beetle, and I had to move the driver's side seat to get to the back where her car seat was. I moved my seat back into position, and I got in, and I had turned my key into the accessory position, but I had not started the engine yet when I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. I turned, and I saw a man leaning over my car on the passenger side with one arm braced against the window. Now, my car is little, obviously, and this man was really tall, like at least 6'5", and he was straight up looming over my car. Now, me being a small-town country dumbass, at first think that this man just needs help. I'm just about to turn and roll the window down when I notice 2 things. The hand that isn't braced against my car is trying to open the door, and the second thing is that the hand that is braced against my car is holding a pair of handcuffs. My stomach dropped straight to the floor. If I were a man, my balls would have probably retracted all the way to my throat. For about 2 seconds, I'm just frozen, staring at this guy. He isn't looking at my door handle as he tries to open it too. He's just staring straight at me, with no expression on his face. The passenger side is locked, thank God, because I need to hit the unlock button on my keys twice in a row to unlock both sides of my car, and I hadn't needed to do that because my sister's car seat was on my side. I finally snap out of it and I turn my key into the ignition. My engine starts and I shift into reverse and I just floor it. I turn and shift into drive and practically fly out of the parking lot. If there had been a car or pedestrian in my way, I would have almost certainly hit them. I was going that fast. For just a second, as I drive the hell out of there, I glance into the rearview mirror to see if this guy is still trying to chase me. And he isn't. He's just standing there, watching me go with one hand in his pocket and the other hand twirling the handcuffs. I speed all the way home and my little sister asks me what happened when we finally get there. She hadn't been paying attention until I started driving like a maniac. I was still shaking, but I didn't want to scare her, so I told her not to worry about it and handed her a popsicle, which swiftly distracted her. My parents got home about an hour later and I told my dad what happened. And he goes grey and just packs me into his car and drives me to the police station. I gave them my report, but as far as I know, nothing ever came of it. The guy either didn't try again with someone else or he just simply moved on to another location. After that night, I refused to run errands by myself for almost half a year as well. This story comes from my dad, who was a security guard for the hospital in our small town. The hospital was built in 1908, established in a mining community, and then turned into a nursing home for miners. My dad had the responsibility of just walking around and looking up the offices and making sure no one else stood around after 10 p.m. This was a 3-story building, and the bottom is where the basement and the old morgue was. The second floor being the meeting offices, kitchen, gym, dialysis center, and visitor bathrooms, and the upper floor was where all the elderly residents stayed and were taken care of. He says that he was walking around on the second floor, just locking up the bottom visitor door and checking offices for people around 11 p.m, and he walked by the women's and men's visitors' bathrooms near the gym. As he was walking by the women's restroom, he heard a woman who hacked a very loud, obnoxious cough, ripped a paper towel from the dispenser, and then it just went quiet. He waited by the door for someone to come out, but no one ever did. He waited a little bit longer, and still nothing. He finally knocked on the door and said, "Ma'am," and there was no response back. So he slowly opened the door, and the lights were off, and there was only an echo that filled the hall when the door loudly squeaked open. He turned the light on, and there was no one in there. He checked the 2 stalls and the small shower that was in there, and it was all empty. He glanced near the trash, and he noticed a piece of torn paper towel, shriveled up and thrown into the trash. Well, he quickly walked out of the restroom and left, and to this day, he swears the cough was as clear as day, loud and eerie. He can't explain it, and he's a pretty big skeptic. There are many other stories of personal experiences that I've had in that building when visiting my dad, but I'll share them another time. When I was 9, I asked my dad for piano lessons. My dad was a professional musician, so he knew a pianist and set up for me to start getting lessons. Scott was actually a great teacher as well, patient and compassionate, and I learned a lot. He was also a really fun guy. He would regularly have weekend bonfires and invite our family, so the adults could drink beer and play rock music, and the kids could just roast marshmallows and run ourselves ragged on his property. But my dad has 3 daughters, me the oldest, and was seeing a woman who also had 3 children, so every weekend there were 6 of us. Scott loved to play with us, and we thought he was the funnest guy for always taking time to hang out with us, all between about 5 and 12. He would let us dress him up and pounce on him, and he loved to tickle us. I know you're seeing red flags go off now, but we didn't at the time. We just liked that an adult thought that we were fun. I actually have a cassette tape of us recording a fake news broadcast when he barges in for a tickle attack. I can't find the cassette player to listen to it, but I'm not sure I even want to. Anyway, as I started to get a bit older, the oldest girl at 11 or 12, I started to notice Scott was showing me favoritism. He loved when I drew him pictures, liked having me on his lap. When he took all the kids in a short ride around the block on his motorcycle, I got the longest ride. He took me all the way to Target and bought me a dress that was way too short and showed my legs off. When we were sunbathing at a beach party once, I could feel him just staring at me through his sunglasses. And here's the thing. The thing that creeps me out the most is back then, I loved the attention. I was in constant competition with 5 other kids, the older, rowdy teenage boys and younger girls. I didn't cause any problems for my dad and his fiancée, so I didn't need any special attention. But Scott paid lots of attention to me, and it made me feel mature and interesting. At some point, he and my dad drifted apart though. The band got a new pianist, and we stopped going to his bonfires. I had already quit taking piano when I was 11 and started learning the clarinet instead. I didn't really think about it for a while, but then one day when I was 16, my dad called me and my sisters in for a family meeting. And Scott was apparently in jail. And he had been arrested for taking advantage of a 12-year-old girl. He made her promises not to tell her parents, but she did, and Dad said that he started to suspect that Scott wasn't someone he should have his family around when he bought me that short dress. And suddenly, it all made sense. I didn't know how to feel. Nothing happened to me, but he'd thought about it for sure. Had I wanted him to think about it? Me, a 12-year-old desperate for adult approval? Was I actually surprised when I heard that he'd been arrested? Not really. Now as an adult, my sense of sexuality is pretty messed up, and I have little trust in people. I wonder what if this is really related to me, if any at all. And occasionally I'm still pretty devastated that someone I'd like so much could have been thinking such evil things about me and my developing body. So, this happened about 9 years ago when I was 15. Me and my school class went on a 20-day vacation trip to USA. We're Brazilian, and we visited New York, Orlando, and Miami, and we grouped in rooms of 3 each, so my room was me and my friends A and B. We stayed and ate at the Hilton Hotel in Miami, room 408. I'll never forget it, for only one night, and there were these strange things that happened there. So it was about 9 p.m. and I didn't have any plans for the night, so we thought of just renting a movie on TV and watching it and then just going to sleep. So A went in for a shower to get ready. And suddenly, me and B hear the sound of glass breaking come from inside the bathroom. It was one of those glasses normally found in US hotels near the sink. So we thought that A had just broken it somehow. So we just laughed to ourselves thinking A just messed up. But then A comes storming out of the bathroom, asking why the hell we entered the bathroom and broke the glass like that by the sink. So me and B were like, dude, there's no way we entered and you didn't see us, right? So how could it have been us? We never reached an agreement, but we all just moved on. A bit later that night, all of a sudden B turns white as a sheet and is scared. He claims that he just saw a dark figure rapidly entering towards the bathroom, but neither me or A believed it, because we didn't see anything. He swears that he saw something, but again, we just moved on. About 30 minutes later, and the phone rang, and I stood up to pick it up. One of our friends in the other room was calling. Nothing strange about that, but it was then that I saw it. A dark figure moving quickly toward that bathroom. I got pale and dropped the phone on the floor, and the 3 of us freaked out. We didn't know what to do, and it honestly scared us half to death. So we just gathered in the same bed, and we just stayed there. A few minutes later, we hear knocking on our door as well, so A and B got up to open it while I stayed in bed praying, and there was nobody outside, and all the lights were out in the hall. And they were those sensor lights that go on when someone walks by. So we just try to relax and find any possible explanation for what just happened. But none of us got any sleep that night. To this day, we still talk about that night, not knowing what any of that was. So, I'm not the only one in my house who has heard their voice replicated by something that resides in my home. It first sounded like my aunt. My mum heard her talking in our dining room. She said that she couldn't quite understand what she was saying and assumed that she must have been just having a conversation with my grandpa, who was the only one awake at the time, around 12 in the morning. However, my grandpa was on the patio. It's directly behind the dining room, and had assumed my aunt was talking to someone else as well. My aunt had recently moved out of the house, though, and has no keys to it, so it's just not possible that it was her. Months later, and my grandma wakes up at around 2 a.m. because she can hear my mum talking behind her bedroom door. She said that she was talking for a while, and then it just got quiet and went inside her room. My grandmother didn't think that there was anything unusual about it, but when she scolded my mother in the morning for waking her up, my mum said that she had spent the night at a friend's house and hadn't come home until about an hour before. And now, whatever was imitating my aunt and mum has started to sound like me as well. It first started 2 weeks ago when I left for school and my mum stayed home. She said that she was doing her makeup in the dining room and heard talking from the direction of my room. She said that it sounded just like me, so she responded with what? And then it clicked to her that I was not at home. She told this thing in my room to behave and didn't hear it again until this week. My brother was home with my mum while I was at school, and they had music on as they got lunch ready, and they say that They heard me shout for my mum, and they turned the music off and then heard it again in the direction of my room. My mum told my grandma, and now I apparently have a blessed Bible wide open on my bookshelf. For some background, I've grown up in South Africa my entire life, and I live in a generally safe area. Any medical professionals in South Africa, doctors, physios, etc., they have to complete a year of community service where the government places you in most likely a rural area where you're expected to work in a public facility and around the community. So, being a medical professional, I moved to another province, equivalent to a state, in South Africa for a year to complete my community service. I won't mention the area, but it's considered more rural than the regular South African city. Needless to say, not living there for very long, I wasn't always sure which hangout spots were considered safe and which I should rather avoid. Fast forward a few months into living in the new province, and my boyfriend came to visit me. He drove around and noticed a huge park enclosed by a fence, and there were tons of families walking around in the grass, braaiing, our version of a barbecue, sitting on benches and all that stuff. But we thought it looked pretty safe, so we chose a spot on a bench and sat down to talk. But my boyfriend still lived back home, so we were doing the distance thing. I was sad that he was leaving again in 2 days and started crying, relevant later. But he calmed me down and we sat looking at the people walking around. Next thing we know, there are 2 guys walking from about 20 meters away, straight towards us. They looked extremely sketchy too. Clothes mismatched and torn, and the typical kind of gangster walk. We thought they might walk past us, but they literally walked straight up to us, and being from South Africa, my boyfriend and I both had a bad feeling about the encounter to come. They approached us, and we froze in place, and instead of getting up and walking away, we just kind of sat there. One of the gangsters, covered in gang tattoos, crouched down next to me while the other one went around to my boyfriend and stood close to him. The idiot on my side had some weird bandages or some type of white glove on his hand. They asked if we could help them with some money because they just got out of jail yesterday. We said we don't have any, but they were persistent and wouldn't leave us alone. I started freaking out at this point because I've been robbed before and I knew their persistent behavior could and probably would escalate to violence. They told us that they didn't want to hurt us but just wanted money or whatever else we have to give. My boyfriend realized this too and took out his brand new phone, at the time a OnePlus 5, in the hopes that they'd just leave us alone. They took the phone and glanced it over a few times, and this brand is not common in South Africa, and because they couldn't recognize it, they said they didn't want the phone. They kept surrounding us though and walked behind us and crouched down, which we assume was so that the other people around us don't see them. I tried to hide my car keys in my pocket because I was scared that they'd try to take the car as they kept looking into my pockets. To be quite honest, I didn't know what to do, so I just kept crying. I told the gangsters that we just found out that my boyfriend's dad passed away and can they not see that we're very upset. Luckily, as said before, I was already crying before they arrived, so it didn't seem like a lie. The one on my boyfriend's side's demeanor immediately changed and he apologized and gave us his condolences. Really? Anyway, the other gangster crouching beside me didn't seem to care and reached into his pocket. And at this point, I was very sure that something bad was about to happen. Like he was about to pull a gun or a knife on us or something if we didn't leave, so I grabbed my boyfriend's hand and we just tried to run away. They just stood there watching us, and luckily, they didn't follow. For anyone wondering, South Africa's crime rate is super high, but one of the highest in the world, in fact. And whilst most areas are fairly safe, you can never escape situations like this. But for anyone thinking that we might have been prejudiced because they didn't actually do anything, I can promise you that when you see a South African gangster, you'll definitely know. They are also known for being just cold and ruthless here, so I'm glad that we made it out of there unharmed, physically anyway. I really don't want to know what could have happened if we didn't get out when we did.